Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to have you all here. My name is Clara. We'll give everyone signing in 1 more minute to join us, to have a chance to log in and everything. As mentioned, my name is Clara. I'm the head of community and people over here at Gather, and I'm so happy that you joined us here. Feel free to use the chat. Let us know where you're joining in from today. We have speakers coming in from all different locations, which we'll ask them later. I'm joining from Prague, which is Central Europe. It is a beautiful afternoon. We're having kind of the final days of the summer here. So drop your location on the right in the chat. And before I invite our amazing speakers to the stage, let me give you a quick introduction about what we're going to talk about today, and of course about our amazing speakers and about Gather. So today's topic will be how to excel at onboarding. Now, before we get to that, I'd love to mention that today's conversation is a panel talk. We have a set of questions we've collected from our community and brainstormed together with our speakers. So I'll be asking those, but of course it is all open to discussion. So please feel free to ask any questions you like. On the right side of the stream, you will find a tab that's called Q&A. If you post your questions there, not only that other folks can upvote them, meaning you can get some thumbs up, so we'll know that we should definitely ask that question, but we can also put your question on the stage so that everybody can see it. And today's conversation is recorded, so in case you need to run early today, don't worry, we have you covered, and we'll send you the recording shortly after the event. Today's event is organized by Gather. At Gather, we are building a project management tool especially designed for people operations. We're specializing in processes like onboarding, offboarding, return from parental leave, or even the little things like, coordinating birthdays and anniversaries in a company. So in case you're looking to automate your people ops processes, check out teamgather.co. Yeah, and with Gather, we're also organizing our People community. With our People community, we're doing webinars and panel talks like this one today. We have a weekly newsletter. We are giving the opportunity to our folks to share their knowledge on our website. We have a lot of interviews in our library. I'll share that in a second. We also have a People Ops job board on our website, which is a very favorite one. And we also have a private network. So onto our library, there is a lot of information on our blog and in our People Ops playbook, from interviews with other People Ops managers to different tips and processes, templates, or even checklists, or your one-on-one and exit interview manuals. So definitely check that out. And like I mentioned, we also have a VIP network of People Ops folks that you can join. This is exclusively for people operations professionals. It is our private community where you can meet other folks like yourself, join one of our networking programs to be matched with people that are working in remote companies with the heads of people network, or just to meet fellow people and learn from each other. So I'll drop the secret link to join our private community in the chat. So definitely look out for that one. And let's move on to today's topic. I am so happy we are chatting about this because onboarding has been one of the favorite processes of mine to design so far as the head of people. So I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I would love to introduce our speakers. Do I have everyone here? I can see everyone. Lindsay, how about we start with you? Can you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Clara. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay. I work at Peloton, which is a global media, fitness, and technology company. You probably know us best for our very addictive fitness classes and our stationary bike. I think I can say this, our cult-like community, maybe. If you are a Peloton member, drop your leaderboard name in the chat, and I'll be sure to give you a high five on the next ride or run that I see you on. I've worked in HR for the past 10 years and have generally focused on working across all of the disciplines. So recruiting, DEI, comp and benefits, all the good stuff. And at Peloton, I lead our HR continuous improvement function. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much for the lovely intro and love the shout out. So anyone who is writing, make sure to drop your nickname in the chat. Lindsay will be looking out for that. Amazing. Lisa, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa. I'm a people operations lead at Fathom based out of Cleveland, Ohio. We're digital marketers. We work with organizations and companies all across the United States, primarily in healthcare and higher education. In my role, my primary focus is really on designing and executing all of the different employee experiences. So huge focus on the past year with onboarding, especially with the transition to a completely remote onboarding experience and then revamping it once again to a hybrid experience. So I love this topic. I'm very excited to talk about it, to share what I've learned and to also learn from everyone else.
Terrific. We're so happy to have you. And I think, a lot of organizations have gone through this transition. So I'm really, really excited to hear your story. And Penelope, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Penelope. I work at SimpleHealth. We are a reproductive healthcare platform. We prescribe, fill prescriptions, handle auto renewal for birth control for patients all across the US. We are about 150 employees currently, so we're growing very quickly, but we're in that kind of sweet spot where a lot of our people operations strategies are starting to take shape beyond sort of the Google Sheet stage. So I'm really excited to hear more about Lindsay and Lisa's experience with this crazy year for onboarding and all kinds of people operations. So excited to be here.
Terrific. Thank you for the introduction. I think that, we have a lot of folks joining from small companies, growing companies, larger teams, right? So I think we have the perfect mix. All right, let's take over the stage and start with our first question. I see everyone putting in their locations in the chat. We're so happy to have you all joining from all different continents, which is amazing. So let's kick this off with what does onboarding onboarding mean to you? And Penelope, I'd like to ask you first. What does onboarding process mean to you? If you think about it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the onboarding process is, to your point, sort of the first touch that a candidate has with the larger company culture beyond kind of that recruiting process, that EVP. They're getting to meet people for the first time. They're experiencing their manager really in that day-to-day while there are a million meetings going on. So I think it's a really rich opportunity for us as people leaders to kind of affirm our incoming employees and incoming hires. And I think it's also a great opportunity for us to kind of double down on those cultural behaviors that we want everybody to associate with working at SimpleHealth or working with wherever we are. But it's challenging too. It's a hard part of bringing people on board.
Yeah, that part you mentioned, kind of, it's like the first step to introduce your culture and start talking to your new hires and kind of, get them rolling in the team. I really agree with that. Lindsay, what about you? What does onboarding mean to you?
Yeah, I think Penelope hit the nail on the head that it's really your first opportunity to reinforce the messages that you put out there. We all worry about our company's EVP and the presence that we have, but we really can affirm what we stand for in the onboarding process and in the recruiting process as well. But so I think of it exactly as Penelope described. I think of it as an opportunity to get it right from the start, and that looks like getting the operations right, so it feels seamless for a new joiner, as well as conveying what's unique and special about your culture and what's exciting about this opportunity. And I think our recruiting partners do incredible jobs of conveying the upside of the roles, but it's incumbent on us as people to start to deliver on that from day one. So it's really your first opportunity to get it right.
I love that. The first opportunity to get it right. And also what you mentioned, on the, kind of there's like the people role in it, but also the ops side, right? The processes and how you build those and how you scale those. So I'm really excited to chat about that. And Lisa, what does onboarding mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Lindsay and Penelope had said, I consider it first impressions. So it really is an opportunity for the new hire to once again feel comfortable and confident in their decision to join the organization. At Fathom, I know we really prioritize relationship building during onboarding. So especially in a hybrid or a remote experience, it's so essential to build those connections, to showcase different areas of support, and to connect your new hire with different employees across the organization that they can go to, that they can build relationships with, that they can start to feel connected to, so that they do become an ingrained part of the culture, and that they are able to find things to talk about both inside and outside of work, even from in a remote capacity. And so huge part of the pre-boarding and onboarding experience for us is all about building and starting those relationships.
Absolutely. I agree with that, right? It's that period where the new hire really gets integrated and inside the teams. So thank you. Actually, Lindsay, you mentioned, the processes and building those scalable operations. So let's chat about, a bit on, kind of getting started and building out those processes. Have you used any sort of templates, or scalable versions of those processes in your past roles, and what did they look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you go through phases as a company where those templates or that process looks different, and so I've seen this in the super early stage company where you've got less than 50 people, and every new hire feels like a huge world of difference, as well as the stage where you're growing from 500 to 1,000. And at that point, it's really about making sure that it's your onboarding process is scalable. That will be sort of the key in the process part of it. I think when you ask the question about sort of like, what are your templates? One of the things that I love to do is I love to zoom out and think about the processes as not just, the onboarding part of it when we look at the process, but what is your full employment life cycle? And there are some companies that have done a great job of modeling this and making that available as a resource that folks can touch. So I always encourage people to start there, but that gets you into the right frame of mind. So for the scale or size of company that you're at, it's not just what the recruiting experience, the onboarding experience is, but making sure that you have a seamless experience through the first 90 days, which feels different than the first day, and the first year, at which point someone, starts thinking about, how do I grow? And so when I look at the process and the templates, I'm making sure that we're solving for each of those. And those templates sometimes start as Google Sheets, and then they get more sophisticated, and you use automation like a Gather as you grow. But so long as you're taking that zoomed out view and thinking of each of the touch points as having weight and merit, then you can really solve for an effective onboarding that feels continuous.
Definitely. I love what you mentioned on, kind of the looking at the overall employee life cycle and either, tackling it from that point of view, or even just the timeline, right? Like if you're not sure where to start with your templates, timing, or like the first day, first week, first month, that can be a great starter. Lisa, what about you? Have you had the chance to work with or even build any templates?
Yes. So absolutely. Over the past year, huge focus on the employee life cycle, as Lindsay said, and really kind of bridging the gaps between each one of those experiences. So one of the things that we started to implement at Fathom over the past year was really integrating the recruitment and hiring experience with onboarding. So we're a smaller company still, sitting just around 100 employees. So we do have the opportunity to be a little bit more hands-on during some of these different experiences. So what we did was we created a new Fathomer coach, is what we call it. And this role essentially is introduced during the hiring process. So while a candidate is going through the interview process, talking with our recruiters, this other kind of third-party unbiased person at Fathom is introduced to kind of just be a warm person to say hello, ask how things are going, ask what questions they may have, about the company, about the organization. And then that same person suddenly becomes their onboarding or pre-boarding buddy. So even before their first day, most communications that they're getting, schedule of events, introduction to major supports, to their direct support, that's all happening with this same consistent person. And then starting on their first day and throughout what we call orientation week, but the whole onboarding process, that new Fathomer coach is also visible, also making sure that they're touching base with that new hire. And so it creates this consistency. It creates this level of trust. It creates a go-to person that they have for any questions or issues that they run into. And then it kind of links all of those first few experiences together so that they do feel very seamless and they don't feel like there's a hard start and stop to each one of them.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, right? Like having that one person during the process, like even during hiring and then pre-boarding and onboarding, who kind of guides you through and is there for you is really interesting. And I think we'll, get back to that as well as we kind of discuss, the topic of onboarding buddies and how to work with them. But I really, really love this is you have, templated, almost a role in that whole process, right? That helps during onboarding. And Penelope, what are some of the processes you're currently building at SimpleHealth? Have you worked with any templates or have you built out any process templates before?
Yeah. I was going to add to Lisa too. I think one of the more challenging things about onboarding that I've experienced in my career so far is those handoffs, right? So like the handoff from recruiting to a hiring manager, the handoff from people ops to sort of the culture as a whole, the team as a whole. And so I think having templates that can make a sort of continuous experience and make it feel like it is flowing from pre-boarding through day one, through your first 30 days, et cetera, is so critical. So I love the idea of what Fathom has been doing. I think that's so great. So I guess to your point, Clara, your question, one of the things that I'm really focused on is identifying how those templates can work in the handoff period, right? So whether it is a pre-onboarding checklist where everybody's role is defined, everybody needs to go in and mark the checkbox that they have sent the hiring manager an email, they have processed the DocuSign, they've created an employee file, all of the little nitty-gritty people ops things. Right now, as 150 and 150 employees, but a people team of 3, all of those things need to be just written down in a Google sheet at this point. So that's sort of where we're at now. We are definitely at the stage where we're exploring what automation is going to look like. We're exploring how we can, how do we think about trigger points instead of just knowing in our head that somebody needs their swag or their first touch email or whatever it is. So that's where we are right now. I think right now it's still a lot of Google Sheets. It's a lot of canned response emails, some Slack bots, Slack reminders, those kinds of things right now.
Absolutely. But I mean, scaling a team in the people team of 3 to 150, that is something. So I bet that, all the templates and processes you have to be very organized, right? To get to that size, because that is amazing.
Yeah, very organized, but very easy to adapt, right? Because things change so quickly.
I just wanted to plus one what you said, Penelope, about when you're scaling the way that it sounds like SimpleHealth is, and you have limited resources, a team of 3 that's, I'm sure, not just doing onboarding, but also everything else in the employee lifecycle. I think it's so important to invest in those automations in those little places where you can get them. And I love the idea of using Slack bots for things. Like when you talked about the handoff, a Slack bot is such a good thing to remind a manager, you've got a new hire joining on Monday, and you set the reminder for 3 days before. And those are the little things that make a really big difference in a new hire's experience. So I just wanted to plus one that and say that I think there are a lot of incredible automations available to the people function that were not available even 5 years ago, that can take some of this off of our hands and out of our Google Sheets, and be a little bit more of a set it and forget it, which for me was really what allowed me to support the scale of functions in my past experience was taking the time to invest in an integration, an automation, a tool that can help onboarding to be a little bit more of a set it and forget it on the process side. And that way you can really invest in the beautiful, rich, customized experience like Lisa has been able to do it at Fathom.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, I know, we were in a very similar position and still are to some point, very small people operations team for the organization as well. And so we also we're kind of like lots of Google Docs and random Excel sheets, wanting to eventually get to the place where we can really invest in tools that automate. And so then there's kind of like this weird middle ground. And so, some of the tools I know that we use, even something like a Trello board or some sort of board like that, we've utilized for those handoffs. So one of the things you mentioned, Penelope, was just like, that's a really tricky point. And so, a shared board or just a shared space like that where you can kind of move things visually has really helped our team, I know, to kind of see where everybody is at in the process of onboarding, who still needs to get their equipment sent out, who still needs to be put in contact with their hiring manager, who still needs their day one schedule sent. And so everybody can kind of see where all of the new hires are, and then move things around visually so that anybody on the people operations team can easily just pop in without having to necessarily like ping someone or Slack someone, and kind of know what am I responsible for and where are they at in the process.
I think another interesting process that just hearing you talk, Lisa, I sort of don't always think about like a process or a tool, but really is a system, is the idea of cohorts, right? Like we are also just identifying that we need to be having onboarding twice a month. We can't do these and sometimes you need to, sometimes when you have a hire that needs to start right away. But the idea of like making sure we're emphasizing cohorts, which is, I think, a better new hire experience for people who are coming in and can ask questions and form relationships straight off the bat, but also is a much cleaner experience from a process perspective. So we're just kind of getting to that place where we have a calendar for onboarding. But I'd love to know too how you all think about that, especially as you scale, whether cohorts become, groups of 40 people, 100 people, and not just 2.
Absolutely. I love that question. Yeah. What does the rest of our panel think about, cohorts and kind of creating these systems around onboarding?
I love cohorts. We recently implemented cohorts within the past year as well. We were doing, before that, kind of just like every week was an orientation week for somebody or for 2 people. And so not scalable and probably not the best experience for new employees. So what we did was similar to kind of where you're at, Penelope. We created a calendar, and every single month we identified 1 week, really after talking with all of the different teams throughout the company to kind of figure out when their not crazy week was. And we call that orientation week. So it's on the company calendar. Everybody knows when orientation week is every single month. And that's kind of the week that we aim for. That's really the week where the new Fathomer coach role is really diving deep and spending a lot of time with our new hires. Of course, you have instances, like you said, where people start before, after an orientation week. So what we've kind of done is we have, templatized, like, here are the things that somebody needs regardless of when they start. They need to have their HR documents, they need to have their equipment set up, they need to have their security training. And here are the things that really are better to hold off on until orientation week happens. So if that's their second or third week, that's okay. But then that's an opportunity for them to spend a lot of time with a lot of other new hires, as well as the new Fathomer coach. Again, it's all about that relationship building. But we've had so much positive feedback from creating this, once a week orientation week, where we really do focus on the new Fathomers and all of the different relationships and meetings and introductions and fun things that we get to set up for them. So that's kind of how we've approached our cohorts. And because we're small, I think at this point, it still is practical for us to do something like that. Our cohorts are typically, 4 to 7 individuals every single month. So still very doable. At some point, as we do grow and scale, we might have to, again, it's a constant, revision. So that's how everything always works. So I'm sure that this will be something that as we do grow, we will look at again and make sure that it's still working for us and working for everybody involved in those orientation weeks.
Yeah, I remember hearing a little bit about the way y'all approach your cohorts, Lisa, in our pre-call where we all got together and talked a little bit about this topic amongst ourselves. And one thing that you said that resonated with me that I've also experienced is that the creation of a cohort allows you to create an onboarding community where folks can learn from each other. And there's a lot of value in that. So, Peloton, we have onboarding almost every week now, I believe. And we're looking at classes of about 40 to 100 hires each cohort. And so that's like a huge scale. And at that point, your operations have to be super duper tight. But that scale also allows you to really create a community within your cohort of folks that are starting. So, the simple thing like creating a dedicated Slack channel and adding all of the new hires for that cohort, to the bigger things like actually having a 1-year celebration with that cohort to really mark the milestone of everyone having a year of tenure. It allows you to really bring that cohort together and create sort of a mini community within your larger community. It also allows you as the people operations professional to step back a little bit, because the questions that we all know that we get all the time, we're not in office, but I was gonna say, if many of us were in office, where's the printer? Or I lost my badge, how do I get another one? But we get, more questions even they're slightly different. How do I get a keyboard sent to my apartment or home? All of that. If you get the onboarding cohort into a community, whether it's in Slack or in another vehicle, they can answer those questions for each other. It also allows your IT team, your benefits function, whoever is owning your benefits, to have a little bit of a window into the common reoccurring problems that happen with your new hires so that they can get ahead of them and solve them. Does everyone have the same login issue? Great, IT, here is your data set of where all of that is coming from so that they can go and solve it, and you can make that little incremental improvement to make your onboarding even better. So I love the investment in cohorting that y'all are doing.
Absolutely. I think cohorts are such a good idea. And I have a quick question, and I'll put it quickly on stage. And that is, what's the right size to actually introduce cohorts, right? Either in terms of your company size or even of, how many people you're onboarding at once. When was the time you started introducing cohorts in your companies? What was the timing? What was the size? What was the reason?
So we started to introduce cohorts last fall. So at that point in time, we were probably around 80 to 85 employees, and we were hiring enough new employees every month that it was just getting to be too much to do every single week. So that's when we started to introduce cohorts. I think our first cohort was 3 people. And like I said, since then we've gone up to maybe 7 or 8. I think for us, that's a very manageable number. It allows a lot of opportunity when we're on Zooms together for individuals to really talk to each other, get to know each other. We have had a couple random months where we had less hires for the month. So there would just be like 1 or 2 people. So when we implemented it that way, it didn't work quite as well since there really wasn't a true cohort. So what we did then was we really individualized it for that 1 or 2 individuals, who were starting that month. But we also, like Lindsay said, heavily relied on introducing them and connecting them to the cohorts that started previously. So if February was a really light hiring month, we made sure that we connected those February new hires to everybody who just started in January or December and let them know, hey, like these 4 people, they just hit their 30-day mark. They just went through a lot of the same things that you're going through right now. they're such a great resource for you. They're still learning. They're still getting their feet wet. Like, please reach out to them. And then we would oftentimes set up, like Lindsay said, a common Slack channel for them all to talk to, or maybe like a little virtual happy hour on Thursday at 4 o'clock with some trivia or something fun to get to know each other, just so that it kind of broke the ice and introduced them to other new starts, since there weren't a lot of other people who, were in their official orientation week cohort.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Wow. I feel like cohorts are one of the things to do when you want to excel at onboarding. I think that's our very first take. And second, what I loved were our templates. When talking about templates and cohorts, everyone here mentioned different tools, whether that was Google Sheets or Slack or like group messages and so on. So I actually love to ask you, what were some of the tools you started testing, you tested that worked well for you, and maybe what did not work well for you? Penelope, what do you think? Have you started, testing some tools or even some, these like best practices, we can call them, and what worked and what didn't?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in the testing phase. I think Trello is an interesting one that Lisa brought up. We have used Trello before. I think it works for us okay. It doesn't feel perfect. At a previous company, we used Asana with all of the sort of necessary stakeholders, and that actually functioned pretty well. But again, it was Asana, at least to me, and I'm like maybe not the most tech fluent person in the world, but Asana, I think, can feel a little like a little bulky when you are still such a lean team. So for us right now, like we really rely on those bots, canned responses, tagging people in comments on either docs or sheets. But I think it really just evolves. And something like Gather, I think, is a great resource for sort of how do we conceptualize, like, what are the moments that we really need to like be automating, either in small ways or big ways, and what are the moments that we can kind of have a more like high touch experience?
Yes, definitely. And I love that you mentioned Asana, actually. I've recently talked to a people ops manager. They were just building their new onboarding process, and we were actually thinking, how we can help them with Gather, as Gather is kind of a Slack automation bot, like some of the features. And they were using Asana. And what I've noticed is that what people ops managers and people ops folks are really great at is just hacking all the tools, right? Mm-hmm. And what they have done actually in Asana, like in their different boards and in the content they were sharing, they actually, instead of like tasks like in Trello, they just added like different, like, here are the pictures of our team, like, check that you have seen them, or like, here's the link to our handbooks. Like, they just kind of hacked the tool all around, and I love that. So I think there's so many ways how you can automate things. Lindsay, what's your experience with tools that worked and that didn't work?
Yeah, Clara, I was like nodding so vigorously at the people function is one that generally hacks other tools to work for us, because in terms of what I've tried in the past that has worked or hasn't worked, a lot of it has been hacking other tools that exist elsewhere, whether it's Jira or Asana or Salesforce in a prior life, attempting to hack something that has some workflow or automation or communications component to work for us. And what I found is that works to a point. And to the question around sort of scale, like, there's no perfect number, but at a point where you have enough new hires joining on a regular cadence, whether it's 5 and 10 a week or more than that, at some point you as a people operations professional need to step back and ask, how far can I go in hacking this? And when is it worthwhile to make the business case to invest in a dedicated tool and resource like Gather, or any of the other sort of like onboarding specific functions. And for me, that was very much when our cohorts got to be, a more than a handful. So 10, 15, 20 in past experiences. And at that point it was, okay, step back. I'm using my Slack integrations. I'm using the free tools like Donut to try and get people to make connections. And I'm still tracking a little bit in Google Sheets. I'm sending some emails automated through Salesforce. But there's got to be a resource out there that can do all of this for me and can also help me model how this connects to the rest of the employee lifecycle. Ideally, it connects to your applicant tracking system, to your ATS, whatever you're using. So some of that information pulls across automatically. And so you're not copying and pasting the individual's home address, into a new tool or a new spreadsheet. But I think it's really worthwhile to make sure that you put that touch point in your calendar, or you hold it in the back of your mind, and you feel comfortable asking yourself, okay, when is it worth it for me to go to my leadership team and say, hey guys, I think we should invest in a dedicated tool just focused on onboarding and employee experience. And there are some incredible ones out there like Ahlers. So definitely always thinking about that. Where's that moment?
Absolutely. And I love what you mentioned on kind of transferring the data, right? From like your like recruiting data to your HRS and then so on. And then, figuring out, I can use this tool, but can my team use this tool, and can our managers, and will they log in, right? There is a lot of different, stakes to tackle. So, I think that's one of the reasons a lot of us have been hacking different tools and then just driving to that one communication point, whether that is, MS Teams, whether that is, your Google Workspace or Slack, to try and ease the work for the managers, right? And make it as seamless for them as for the onboardees. So I think that's a really, really interesting point. So I kind of wanted to add that. Lisa, how about you? What are your experiences with tools that worked and that didn't work?
Yeah. So, similar to what Penelope and Lindsay said, we've kind of tried a little bit of everything. And, for a while, everything was just so decentralized. And so it was a lot of, a little bit here and there. So a little bit of like a shared folder and box that our people operations team would all have access to. And that would house some, Google Docs or Excel sheets that everyone was supposed to go in and color their box green when they did their to-do item. It was the Trello board. It was our people ops Slack channel. It was a special people team distro list that we had in email. And so all of these different things. And, just even over the past quarter or so, it's really become apparent. And that was one of the things that really got us so interested in Gather, was that there were so many different touch points. And it started to feel like you were juggling like too many things at once. So they weren't talking to each other. They weren't communicating with one another. And therefore you weren't sure like what the real source of truth was, like which one was updated the most. And did we forget to also change this person's new, last name because they got married in this one Excel doc? And so we really are kind of at the point in our organization, sitting, like I said, around 100 employees, but growing very quickly, where these are a lot of things that are top of mind for us. How do we find more tools and implement more tools like Gather that are very scalable, that are more centralized, that are easy and templatized, that take away a lot of that more administrative work off of our team, so that we can really focus on the people part of it and on the forward-facing relationship building part, and leave a lot of that like running around, utilizing all of these, random tools and bits and pieces and folders and logins, and kind of, take some of that off of our plates. So that's been very, very a very high priority for us lately.
I love what you mentioned on, focusing more on the people part and leaving the manual things, to be automated. I feel like there is sort of a breaking point, right, in your onboarding process, because that's the one that has to be, very, very seamless, and it's really crucial to the overall employee experience and to retention and happiness and so on. If you can be a really, really great people ops manager, but if you spend, 80% of your time, deep diving in Google Sheets, then, that value just gets lost. So, what we've mentioned on, trying to figure out the best automation for you, for your team, for like the other tools you're using, and also working with cohorts. I mean, I still love that idea. So I think that's super, super important to make sure that we are investing, right, our energy the right way so that we can truly help the employee, and kind of not the internal tracking system when it comes to it, right? Amazing. Let's chat a bit about onboarding rituals. You've all mentioned a few things in your onboarding process already. So my question to you would be, what's your favorite onboarding ritual that you have gone through, that you have built, that you are building? What's your kind of favorite part of the onboarding process? I'll let everyone think and see who has an idea first.
Yeah, I've got one that jumps out right off the top of my head, just because it's one that I love and that I wish I could bring to Peloton, but I think we're just a little too big at this point. In a past life, I worked at a startup where authenticity was incredibly important to the core culture. This was a company that delivered primary care and mental health to low-income, high-needs populations. And so the concept of authenticity and trust was so core to the product that we delivered that it also became really core to our corporate culture as well. And so we wanted to really set the tone in the beginning from onboarding that you were expected to bring your whole self, your authentic self to work. And that was something that we really celebrated. And the way we did that was for every cohort class, whether it was our cohorts of 5 or when we grew to cohorts of 50, we got everyone together, and we transitioned that to virtual with the pandemic. But we got everyone together and we had a dedicated session. It was usually an hour and a half, actually, so a big investment of time with the founders. And everyone just talked about what is their story and what inspired them to come join the company. And we got some incredibly moving stories from people who had really deep personal connections to serving underserved communities. And then we got folks, who were there because they thought this was an interesting engineering problem to tackle. But what that allowed us to do is allow folks to, with the founders, to have a really genuine, authentic conversation. And we often saw tears. We would see virtual high fives. When we were in person, there was a lot of hugs. But it really helped set the expectation from the beginning that authenticity, bringing your whole self and being connected to this concept of trust in the medical system, was really important up front. And so I think from a ritual perspective, it was about stepping back and asking what type of a culture do we want to create and reinforce, and then how can we bring that to life through a ritual.
That is really beautiful. I think that is such a nice thing to do. And as you mentioned, can be done both in person and in the virtual setting. And especially if you have the founders coming in and opening and sharing, their story, and everyone kind of listening and then following up. I think that is wonderful. Penelope, what about you? What are some of the onboarding rituals that you have seen so far?
Yeah, I first want to really, really plus one what you said, Lindsay, about stepping back and using kind of the culture building and like the people philosophy to really drive those rituals. I think those are always the ones that stick. They're always the ones that feel best to people who are coming in. They, again, like reinforce how you want to be as a company. An example that is sort of similar, I'm thinking back to a previous company where teamwork, like cross-training, collaboration was a huge part of what we did. And so the ritual we had during your first 30 days is you did shadow shifts, which with, I think, 2 different teams or departments across the company. And they were like rigorous day-long shadow shifts. You were in meetings, you were completing tasks, you were doing work. And I think not only did it help everybody understand, like, what does this company do? What is the scope of the work happening here? But it was also such a great way to relationship build with teams or people that you would never interact with typically, or that you would interact with only over email. I think that was the shadow shift program was a really important part of our onboarding ritual. And again, it was one that executives did. Our founders did it quarterly as well. Like, we were really just invested in making sure people understood what everybody else did. So that was a really nice one. I haven't figured out how to make that one work virtually yet, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about.
Definitely. I think it's always challenging, right? If you have those beautiful experiences, in the offline setting, to bring them into online, but they can definitely be an inspiration. In one of my past roles, when I worked for Blue Wolf, which was a Salesforce consultancy company, our tradition was to, we were all consultants, right? So one of our tradition was to bring everyone together. It was long before the pandemic, and we would bring folks from all different offices, from San Francisco to Boston into one location. We would train them for 3 days on public speaking and emotional intelligence. And we would have folks from the C-level folks to the ones that just got out of universities, and this was their very first role. And everyone really bonded together over on learning how to kind of almost like talk again on public, right? Because we had like all these specific things that we were doing and these crazy exercises we were practicing, and different brainstormings and so on. So I was also trying to think in my last, in the last few months, how can I kind of bring that similar experience I had, as the onboardee and then later as the trainer, to my onboardees right now, right? To kind of make it a bit more fun, a bit more interactive and bonding. So I think it's always challenging, but it's great to have that inspiration in the first place, right? To work off of. Lisa, over to you. What are some of your favorite onboarding rituals?
Yeah, so I actually have two that came to mind first. So similar to something that all three of you have mentioned that I would like to echo is all of you mentioned some sort of ritual where there was interaction with the executives or with the founders. And I think that that's so important and just so essential. One of the things that we do during orientation week is we set up one-on-ones with each individual executive and our cohorts. So they get to chat again, because it's all remote right now. So via Zoom, but they get to chat with each executive. They have about 45 minutes to an hour to talk to them, learn more about why they chose to come to Fathom, what they do at Fathom, how they're involved with the different teams, and then also get to know them as individuals. I mean, right now it's easy because they can see their home and their picture frames behind them, but they get to learn about their families, their children, their pets, what they like to do in their free time. I've had so many of our new hires say that previous to this experience, they'd been at companies for years and had never met the executives, that they always seemed like some far away, presence that like you heard about, you knew their name, but you had no clue who they were. And so we're very intentional on breaking down that barrier right at the beginning and letting every single cohort have one-on-one time with our executive team. The other ritual that we have received a lot of really positive feedback, it actually happens right before an employee's first day. So the new Fathomer coach sets up time for either a one-on-one call, like a Zoom call, with the new employee, or an email. So that's something that we've templatized, but it's really just to kind of get those first day nerves out and any questions that they may have. Do you feel comfortable? It can be as simple as like, a lot of people are nervous about like, what do I wear? It's remote. Like, what am I expected to wear on my first day? And so those are the simple things that we talk about during that, one-on-one Zoom call or in the email. Like, don't worry about being, you don't have to wear a blazer. Like, it's pretty casual, wear something that you're comfortable with. We talk about, they're not sure when to start. So, when do we technically start? Since I don't have to show up at an office, what time should I make sure that I'm logged in the morning? And so I just make sure that every single new employee gets that one-on-one individualized time. Typically, it's 2 to 3 business days before their first day, just to make sure that we answer any of those last-minute questions that have come up, and that we make sure that they feel comfortable, that they feel confident, that they feel ready, that their tech is working. So that way, going into day one, hopefully it gets rid of some of that anxiety and those first day nerves and just increases the level of excitement that they have and support that they feel from us before, they even log in for day one.
Yes. Yes to both, right? I love the idea of having the opportunity to connect with the leadership. I think that is so special. We also had one-on-ones with our founder in my last company as well. And I think that is so powerful. And also to having a pulse check-in before you start, right? I think that is such a very easy thing to do. And it I think it leaves an amazing impression with the new hire, right? Just to, from that very intense hiring process to, that sort of space between where you're like not sure what's happening. I think that is amazing. Terrific. I have a few questions on my side, but I want to make sure that all our attendees have a chance to ask their questions. So before we dive into my very last topic, if anyone has a question for our amazing panelists, please drop it in the Q&A box. We'll be sharing your questions soon. And one of my final questions is, we set up our process, we track it, we put it in a template, we set up a tool, we have our cohorts, we have our pre-boarding, our onboarding, post-onboarding. How do we measure that? What are the tools that you have used to measure the success, measure the feedback from the new hires, and maybe even from the co-pilots, from their onboarding buddies, from their managers? How have you worked with this feedback in the past? Lindsay, how about you start?
Yeah, sure. I think when you think about measuring onboarding, you are probably measuring multiple facets. The first that you want to measure is a onboarding experience. So did the individual, the new hire, get their questions answered? Did they have their tech set up, to Lisa's point? Did they have a touch point with their manager in the first day or in the first couple of days? So one measurement is the quality of the experience. And that in my experience, I've typically done via some type of a surveying tool. I think a lot of us use Culture Amp for our engagement surveys. And it's very easy. They have templatized or standard suggested 30, 60, 90-day surveys. I like to stick with just one survey instead of surveying at 30, 60, 90 days, because I find that the quality of the data starts to degrade the farther along you go. And so you're not really getting actionable insights if you measure a lot. But doing at least just one touch point that says, hey, how was your experience? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? And that can help you inform any changes or tweaks you want to make going forward. The other facet that I think it's really important to measure is how effective you were in your hiring and onboarding, and how quickly the individual is having the impact that you would expect them to make. And this is where you really start looking at retention and performance. And so the place where I usually like to measure that in a fast growing startup is at a 6-month retention mark. So if you have anyone who leaves before 6 months, it probably was, as a diagnosis level, either a hiring mistake or something that the organization did poorly to not set this person up for success, or to not really help them understand what was expected of them in the role, or how they could grow. And so using that 6-month mark as a way to really say, do we still have everyone from that onboarding class? And you can even measure that quarterly through really easy data. You could do it yourself in Excel if you wanted to, but then of course, if you have an HRIS, that can really help you model out your retention. And then performance too. It's always great to tie this back to the qualitative, side conversations that we used to have in the hallway, and now we have in Slack with a hiring manager a couple of months down the line, and say, hey, how is this person performing? You've had a couple of cohorts join. Which cohort really stood out? And do you think, what did we do differently there? And so that can be both really, that performance piece can be both really data-driven when you look at retention, and it can also be qualitative. You can pull out some nice themes that way. So that's how I've thought about it. But super curious about other people, because I think there's a lot of different ways you could cut this or think about it.
Absolutely. I'm very curious as well. Lisa, what about you? How have you measured onboarding and the success of onboarding?
Sure. Yeah. So very similar to what Lindsay started off saying, our first to do is to get some feedback from the actual new employees. So we do utilize Culture Amp for that. And we've implemented what we call new Fathomer experience surveys. So we just call them NFX surveys for short. So everybody knows that they will be expecting these surveys at some point during their onboarding experience. We typically at this point have really built out two. So we have one that is administered at the end of their first week. And that really goes over the whole hiring experience and pre-boarding. How did you feel as you were having these conversations and deciding if Fathom was the right choice for you? And then how did you feel at that, in between stage before day one? And then we have one that's typically administered 30 days out from their first day. And that's more, how has it gone with immersion, with your team, with your hiring manager, with figuring out like, these are the way that we do things around here at Fathom. And I know what the expectations are, and I know who to go to for certain things. So it's more, how do you feel as far as your expectations in your role and your team in the organization? And then we're at the point now where we are focusing on building that out even further. So we do look at a very high level at retention, like Lindsay mentioned, but one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is that performance piece. So that's kind of next up on our plate to tackle, is really some of that data, as far as what are, how are these new employees performing after 90 days, 6 months, 1 year? Do we see any trends or any patterns where we can offer more support, where we can intervene earlier to help them out? Are there tools that they're missing, systems that we need to build out for them, cross-functional teams that we need to put them on so that they, have a deeper connection with individuals across the organization? So that's kind of next up for us to tackle, but I'm very excited about that because that'll give us some more objective data that we'll be able to utilize to continue to build out those employee experiences too.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, it's a process, right? There's always something changing, something evolving. So yeah, definitely a lot of things ahead as well. Penelope, what about you? What have been some of the surveys or, ways of gathering feedback that you've done so far and that have worked really well?
Yeah, I mean, mine's pretty similar. We also do a Culture Amp survey that asks questions around, did you get your tech? Do you have a point of contact? All the things Lindsay mentioned, and also dives into some of the sort of immersion questions that Lisa's mentioned. I think one thing that I'd add is that we've done, again, at this number, at like 150, and this is similarly my experience in other companies at this number, things are moving so quickly that the needs you have when you put out a requisition for a job can sometimes change 6 months in. So one of the things that we're doing now is we're having quarterly sort of postmortems with our recruiting team and each of those hiring managers that brought on people during that quarter, and really sort of getting to the bottom of like, was this right? Like, is this job the job we still need? Did this hire fit the needs we have? And then how, if it's not, if we need to sort of reevaluate and adjust, how do we plan for that hire's, performance plan or goal setting to really like reestablish the expectations that we have based on how the company is growing? And I think we have seen success there because it's no fun to come into a job that is changing underneath you. And so when we can sort of, get in front of that before we get to that person's like annual review or some kind of PIP or performance improvement plan, like how do we make sure we're continuing that conversation with both our recruiting team, our hiring managers, and our new employees?
Absolutely. Like understanding how did we hire that person, why, and was it a good decision? Like not only feedbacking, their experience and their manager's experience, but the team, right? What was our thought process behind this? Have we done this well? I think that's a really, really interesting one. And we have a question from the crowd from Luciana. So the question we have is, do you have any dedicated budget to help new employees to set up their home office? How important do you consider this perk? So Penelope, over to you. What have you worked with any sort of remote budgets in terms of the onboarding setup?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's also one that I was talking about just yesterday around, are we going to increase our work from home budget? I think during the first year of the pandemic, it was this kind of almost Band-Aid solution. And to be really frank, it was $150 for work from home equipment. And now that we are sort of in, I don't even know, what is it, year 3, year 2 of work from home, and we're pretty dedicated as a company to being remote first. How do we incentivize that? How do we make sure that we're really leaning into what the advantages of remote work are and how do we sort of reward people for participating in it with us. So, I'm hoping to increase that budget. That's something that's on my list that I'm really pushing for in our budgeting conversations. Again, we're not a huge company. We can't do like a 1,500 2K budget, but I'm pushing for 500. That's my goal right now. Let you know if it gets approved.
Amazing. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I hope it all works out. And Lisa, I know you kind of went through, similar transition from going, from the office to the remote. Have you set up any budgets, or are you thinking about setting up any budgets?
Yeah, great question. So similar to Penelope, to be transparent, our current budget. So basically what we did was we've always had like a wellness reimbursement budget. So every employee is able to be reimbursed up to $250 per calendar year for wellness related expenses. When we went remote last year, we decided to extend that to home office purchases as well. So if an employee wasn't going to the gym because their gym was closed, they could utilize that to buy a new office chair or some new equipment for their home office. Now, one of the things that's top of mind for us is reevaluating employee benefits and perks, since now we have this hybrid workforce. So we've hired a lot of employees over the past year and a half that are outside of the greater Cleveland area. And so some of the perks that we have for those who are local, like a gym facility at our office, that's not a perk for, our employees that are on the West Coast. So now we're reevaluating how can we make sure that we translate some of these perks that are traditionally for more in-person employees to our employees that are scattered across the country. So I do think that this is definitely something that we will be looking at. And if not, at least maintaining or increasing that wellness reimbursement budget for each employee, then having something more dedicated for those employees who do continue to work remote moving forward.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Lindsay, any experience with remote setups, with remote budgets?
Yeah, I think the answer is short. Yes, absolutely. This is something that I don't think of it even as a perk. I think of it as a requirement in the current climate that we're in. And if you're in any organization that is has remote employees. And one way that I've thought about finding that budget or being strategic and how to get to that conversation with the leadership team is by, on an annual basis, looking at or you do it more frequently than that, looking at your overall benefits and perks, if you're going to use that term, and seeing, what doesn't work in a pandemic space, where can you recoup costs, and where should you invest more going forward, and then really coming to the leadership and coming to the negotiating table when it's time to talk budgets about, hey, your healthcare coverage, if you have that, is probably a huge line item in your OpEx. Where can you make changes to that benefit offering, for example, or reduce a perk there in a remote first culture to be able to ensure that your employees are set up for success from home, because it's a non-negotiable now. We're all working from the couches and the side rooms and wherever, and we've got to try and make it comfortable and sustainable for folks.
I definitely agree. And I love that you mentioned, both like the onboarding setup budget, but also benefits. And this will actually be our topic in December. We'll have a topic, let's talk benefits in remote setup, and how have they changed, and what are, what's happening in that space. So I'm really excited about that conversation. Amazing. I think we have hit our 1 hour mark. So this will be it for us today. I wanted to thank you all. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Penelope. And thank you, Lindsay, for joining us. This was an amazing chat. We've covered everything from, setting up your processes, putting the right people to help, cohorting your new hires, as well as the tooling and how to feedback the whole process. I think this was, a really, really informative conversation. So I hope everyone enjoyed it. I've also dropped the link to our VIP secret community in case anybody wants to join. You now have the opportunity in the chat. So thank you all so much for coming. I'll also share the LinkedIns if you want to follow our speakers on LinkedIn. You'll have a chance to do that. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming today. It was really, really great to have you all here.
Thank you so much for setting it up. Thank you both.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.